The loop is ready, and all we have to do now is make each part of the post dynamic. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a page in the handbook called Template Tags. Template tags are PHP functions that display information onto the page. There are hundreds of them, and each are simple to use. The purpose of a template tag is to make your code readable and simpler. Usually, you would have to query the database and grab this information manually. Template tags save you time by doing all the work behind the scenes. All you have to do is call the function associated with the data you'd like to grab. On this page is a long list of functions that return information about the blog. A majority of these functions can be used anywhere in your template. You are not required to use them inside the loop. However, there are benefits to running some of these functions inside a loop. You'll see how that works in just a moment. Let's scroll down to the post tags section of this page. You'll see we have quite a few functions that we can use inside the loop. Let's use one of these template tags now. The first one we'll be using is the post thumbnail function. Open the content excerpt template and look for the image tag that contains the featured image. Let's remove this and instead call this function. Keep in mind that this template is being loaded inside the loop. The function will generate the HTML for our image and output it. The benefit of using a template tag inside the loop is that template tag functions will automatically detect that it's inside a loop. This function and any other function we use inside the loop will automatically know which post to grab the information from. This function has a couple of parameters we can set. The first parameter is the size of the image. You can pass in a number if you believe you know a good size, or you can take advantage of WordPress's post thumbnail size feature. In the resource section, I provide a link to the post thumbnail page. WordPress describes in detail about post thumbnails, but we won't concern ourselves with the whole thing. Scroll down to where it talks about the sizes available. From what WordPress says, there are 4 size aliases we can use: thumbnail, medium, large, and full. Full can be thought of as the original size. Let's pass in full to the function. The second parameter is an array of attributes that WordPress will add to the HTML generated. You can set any attribute you'd like. There are no restrictions. The only attribute I want to override is the class attribute. One class I'd like to use is the image_fade class, which will give the image a nice effect. Let's use the key called class and set its value to image_fade. That's all we need to do. Refresh the page and check out the post thumbnail. This is exactly what we wanted. You should see something similar to what I see. You may have different images, as FakerPress generated most of these posts and grabs random images from the internet. Some posts will not have images, and that's perfectly fine. We need to do one more thing before we move on to the other parts of the template. Not every post that is displayed will automatically have an image associated with it. We can't assume every post will have a post image. So what we're going to do is wrap the div tag with the class entry-image with a conditional statement. Inside this conditional statement, we'll use the hasPostThumbnail function. As the name suggests, this will simply check to see if the current post in the loop has a thumbnail. If it's true, then we'll display the image. What I love about these functions is that they can automatically detect that we're in a loop and will check each post individually. Before we continue on, I want to briefly talk about thumbnail sizes. If you were to go to the admin dashboard and navigate to Settings Media, you'll find settings to change the sizes of certain thumbnails. Feel free to adjust these as you like. We also have the power to add thumbnail sizes. This is something we'll explore in a future lecture. Let's finish up the loop here by making the rest of the post dynamic. Most of the functions I'm going to introduce here can be found on the Template Tags Handbook page. We're going to start from the top and work our way down. First up is the title. Inside the div tag with the class entry title, you'll find the title. We're going to replace this static text by calling the function the title. you'll notice that there's also a function called getTheTitle. This is a common naming convention for template tags. The main difference between these two types of functions is that the get version will return the value while the non-get version will echo out the value. The value itself is always the same. Some template tags also come with the option of passing in HTML to format the content. This function has two parameters, which is the HTML that will be placed before and after the title. For example, I can pass in opening and closing H2 tags like so. As a result, there are two ways to go about this. You can just output the HTML tag yourself or pass it into the function. The benefit of passing in your HTML is that you give developers the opportunity to modify the HTML. This right here depends on the design of your theme. I'm going to remove these because I prefer not to have developers format this title. Not all template tags have these options, but it's definitely something you should consider if the option is available. Alright, let's move on. Next up is the permalink function. I'm going to replace the link for the title with this function. This function will simply echo out the URL to the post itself. Keep in mind that I'm getting all these from the template tags codex page. All these functions are available to us and you can use them freely. We will actually have to use this function multiple times as there are multiple locations a link is being used. Make sure you update all links as I have. Next up is the date. We'll be using the function getTheDate and we'll be echoing out the value. There is a theDate function, but this function actually comes with a problem. If there are posts with the same date, then this function will end up acting funny and display the same date even after the date between posts has changed. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the date function. Here is what WordPress says. Special note, when there are multiple posts on a page published under the same day, the date only displays the date for the first post. To repeat the date for posts published under the same day, you should use the template tag TheTime or getTheDate. WordPress itself recommends that you use the getTheDate function rather than the date function. The format for the date is determined by the administrator. In the admin dashboard, navigate to Settings General. Here, we can modify the output of the date. We can also modify the format through the function itself. This function can optionally accept one parameter, which is a format. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to formatting the date and time in WordPress. You can pass in any of the following and WordPress will change the output. I'm not going to change the format as I like to let my users determine their own preferred format. If you don't specify a format, then WordPress will use the format in the settings. Let's keep going. Use the author function to output the name of the author. So far so good. Up next is setting up the URL to the author. This one's going to be a bit tricky as we have to use two functions to obtain this value. We'll be echoing out the value returned by the function getAuthorPostsURL. This function will return the URL to the author's profile. However, unlike the other functions, this function isn't aware of being in a loop. All the other functions will automatically use the ID in the loop. This function requires that we pass in the ID of the author. So to do this, we have to use the function getTheAuthorMeta, which will retrieve information about the author. This function is aware that it's inside the loop. This function can return a number of values, but we're interested in the ID of the author. So I'll just pass in ID. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to the author meta function. The page displays all the possible values you can retrieve using this function. This bit of code here will grab the permalink to the author's posts. The very last thing we want to do is the callTheCategory function, which will return an unordered list of links of categories for each post. However, we do not want that. We want the categories to be separated by spaces. Luckily, we can pass in a string that will act as a separator. so I will pass in a string of an empty space. Next up is the comments number function. Replace this static text with the function. This function will output the number of comments a post has. There are 3 parameters which are all optional. The first parameter is the text to display if there are no comments. I'm going to pass in the string 0. If I were to admit this value, then WordPress will automatically display no comments if there are 0 comments in the post. By passing in the string 0, WordPress will just output the string itself. The second parameter is the text to display if there is 1 comment, and the third parameter is the text to display if there is more than 1 comment. I won't be setting these since I like the default values anyway. The last thing we have to do is update the excerpt. I'm going to replace the paragraph tags and call the function the excerpt, which is a shortened version of the original post. It's a really great way to give readers a preview of what's in the post itself. As you can already tell, we're just calling a bunch of functions that WordPress will take care of replacing. WordPress takes care of everything from pagination to querying the database to looping through everything. All we have to do is instruct it where we want to place the data. Let's refresh the page and see our dynamic posts. As expected, everything works. Before I end this lecture, I want to talk a little more about template tags. Let's go back to the page with the list of template tags. People often get confused what a template tag is. Template tags is just a fancy phrase for a plain regular PHP function. The point of a template tag is to remove a lot of the logic from your template. Your template should mostly be HTML with some PHP code outputting the data. Template tags are functions that handle all the logic for retrieving or processing data. If we take a look at this list of functions, you'll see that the first few items are the getHeader, getFooter, and getSidebar functions. You should be familiar with these functions so far. Even though these functions don't query the database, they do take care of loading certain templates and performing checks. There are so many template tags here that it's a bit difficult to explore them all. The best way to learn about a template tag is through practical use and understanding how to use them. Throughout this course, we'll be exploring how to use a lot of these template tags. Anyway, that wraps it up for now. I'll see you in the next lecture.